Hey everybody, is there anyone speaking? I couldn't hear a thing.
I haven't heard anything else either.
Okay, let's go ahead get started. John is already presenting, so Greg, I think you are first on the agenda. Should we jump into that?
Sure. So this is a promotion of an experimental command to, I guess, not experimental. This is a pull request that's open in upstream, and the link there is provided in the doc. I guess the thing that makes this one different than a normal experimental command promotion is the fact that this is promoting experimental proxy status to proxy status. So the experimental functionality is replacing the existing proxy status functionality. But when I say replace, if my interpretation is correct here, Istio experimental contains a wider list of functionality, and Istio PS proxy status right now is just a subset. So in theory, this promotion should not result in any loss of functionality, only the gain of new functionality. And so I guess I just wanted to raise this one on the community call for awareness, see if there are any objections that we need to consider. And then I guess due to the unique situation of this one replacing an existing command, I'm kind of wondering if there's any additional steps we need to follow during that promotion. So I guess I'll open that up to any questions or comments now.
Greg, would you mind walking us through what's new in the new proxy status command?
Sure. So let's see. I'm not able to share my screen right now, but so this one provides a few additional flags to proxy status, such as providing a XDS address, a XDS port, a list of XDS agents. So I guess the big main feature here is the potential for multi-cluster functionality.
Okay, and if you don't leverage any of those flags, the behavior just stays the same as it was?
Correct.
Well,
So what if you don't run multi-cluster? Would because I'm trying to think, would those flags not show if you're not running multi-cluster?
So the flags will still show, and just I guess I need to double check on some of these defaults, but some of these flags should not take any effect versus just using the existing defaults that the base command already uses. But I suppose that's something that we can lay out specifically in the pull request.
Yeah,
So
the other thing I was thinking of, what is the process of moving experimental to, promoting it in the past? Do we get rid of the experimental command altogether so that anybody who was using it would be broken? Or does that somehow get deprecated out? I don't remember what we've done in the past.
Yeah, so I'm new to the UX work group myself, and I don't recall the exact steps, but I glanced at previous promotion steps, and it's been to promote to non-experimental and leave the experimental for at least one release, and then remove it in follow-up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we traditionally leave the experimental command as around as an alias for a generous amount of time because it doesn't represent a substantial amount of tech debt. It points to the same code. It's not as though we have two copies of the command, just two ways to run it.
okay, I think I'm next. So basically, I think I'm concerned about adding the new feature and go directly to Istio proxy status. I think the existing proxy status, which everybody are familiar with, is probably okay to promote it. But given there are additional features for multi-cluster, and I'm also very wary whether it would work for different multi-cluster deployment models. I'm very concerned to moving that directly to graduate out of experimental for that portion.
So your concerns are, I guess, the existence of robust tests to be able to guarantee the worthiness of these additional flags being promoted to the base command. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right, because if I understand you correctly, we're not only promoting what's been out there for a long time, we're also promoting what's recently added to support additional columns, I would say, for this command, and particularly for multi-cluster. So I'm concerned about the additional portion goes straight to graduation.
I don't think that's the case. There's Istio PS, which has been around and graduated for 5 years. And then there's Istio X PS, which is the same thing, but it's using XDS instead of the debug HTTP interfaces. It's been around for, I don't know, probably two or 3 years. I had worked on it, and it's not been on the project for quite a while. So that should give you a sense of how long it's been around. So the proposal is to replace the old one with the newer one. Or the alternative proposal is to kill the newer one. But then we lose, obviously, the benefits it brings. Or we could keep both, but then we have two code bases to do the same thing.
So there's no additional function added recently,
No,
which is
I don't think it's
graduating.
changed.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. I mean, maybe some trivial things, but not the core of it. It's just the implementation details of it are different.
Okay, I missed that earlier. Thanks for the clarification. Carsten, I think you have a hand next.
Yeah, actually, John just said what I was planning to say. The main issue is what are we promoting and what we expect to remain stable in order for what we promote to remain stable. So the current PS and a lot of stuff are based on some there are kind of hacks going on in the implementation of Istio PS and all the other stuff. I mean, it's the new one based on XDS is definitely more supportable because it's not based on but fundamentally we are promising to support forever or for a very long time a particular interface. We are promising to be able to, regardless if we have VMs, we have other environments, we have multiple clusters, we will be able to get this information. You may have 1 million pods, so we may have 10,000. I don't know what is the limit. So we don't know how much we can scale with this interface, and how stable the underlying technology will be. I mean, with ambient, with other things, we will be able to get the same kind of information. I mean, to show all the pods and some status for ambient. But specifically for moving from one implementation to the other, I have no problem. I mean, the problem is also with the old implementation and how it will evolve and how stable we can keep it. That's I don't know if it makes any sense, but like a lot of other things happening in Istio, we need to take into account what will happen when Z-tunnel is in place, or what happens when we have larger scales, basically.
Yeah, Costin, I think I agree with you that we need to make sure the interface is good. This did undergo design review about 3 years ago now, and we felt at the time that the interface was going to be stable. My gut tells me that on the whole, XDS is going to be more stable than our HTTP debug endpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's strictly speaking an improvement. Greg, my only concern is in the case that there is some edge case we haven't yet detected, a user who's making use of the existing proxy status command, and we haven't discovered some particular nuance about the way they're using it. Is there a fallback mechanism for them to use the old proxy status command? Like, could I use proxy status from Istio 120 on Istio 121, and would that keep working?
That's a good question. How would it be preserved in this case? Well, so with Istio CTL, the alternative is always you can use an older binary, correct?
You can, as long as, like, for instance, are we disabling the debug endpoint on pilot as part of this promotion?
It's recommended to disable, right, in production.
If we disable it, we'll break other things like Kiali and whatnot.
Okay.
So I mean, I think they're also considering moving over to XDS. So I would suggest that we do the command change and then start tracking what we need to do to remove the debug interface. Maybe call it deprecated. Let it stay at least for a couple releases. If someone has issue with XPS, then they can use the older version, and obviously then we should go fix it or revert it or whatever. And if someone has issue with debug tool, it's not the end of the world. They're not going to have an outage. I hope.
That sounds like a good plan to me. I like it.
And we should clearly deprecate the debug interface, because again, it was intended for debug internally. It was never meant as a stable interface that we are committed to support as V1. One of the other many implementation details that leaked into an API.
Yes.
Well, to be fair, the XDS debug over XTS is almost just as unstable, right? It's
at least it has TLS and authentication, so it's not.
no, it's no, don't get me wrong. It's much better, but it's not like we're still sending the same information. It's just
and that is my concern again. With ambient, we have defined an interface. We reviewed it. We believe it's stable. We can keep it stable. But this one is so broad and so wide that I highly doubt it will scale or it will work properly. For large clusters, for example. So maybe we should revisit how we do stuff and have another design session about what is a proper way to get the list of all the, assuming we have 10 clusters with 10,000 pod each. What is a proper way to get this information? Is it still a PS that collects 100,000 addresses and shows them in a list, or do we want to have more refined methods?
I think there's certainly improvements to be made, but I struggle to see someone spending the amount of time that it would take to make it happen. Or even if they did, like, is it even worth it? Like, PS is not that important to me if it means a lot of complexity.
I agree. I mean, you do kubectl PS. I mean, you have other tools to get the list of pods and to find out if they have a proxy or not. You can look at for labels. There are existing tools in Kubernetes that give you information about the list of pods that you can select. You can put RBAC control and so forth. And then you can use proxy config, which is a real thing.
Well, Greg, I think that sounds a lot like an approval to me. Any objections?
Let's see, did I capture all of the action items that came up related to this one?
I think good. I think under ambient impact, I might particularly try to make sure we have integration tests for ambient with proxy status, so that when we break the XDS interface, since we are evolving it a lot with ambient, we get proactive notification rather than finding out from a customer. That testing exists for all I know. I'm not saying that it's not. Just
Istio CTL and ambient in general just needs more work. I know for a proxy status standpoint, Z tunnels are currently kind of stubbed out, but not fully supported since we have the Istio CTL workload command for kind of checking everything that's loaded into the Z tunnel.
Okay, well then my intent would not be to burden this down with all of the weight of ambient. If there's known gaps and Istio Cuddle for ambient is not going to be ready particularly soon, then I guess you can kind of scrub that for now.
Yeah, I would say just adding on to what Mitch said, like about that this probably makes sense to move forward. Let's just make sure we do a pass over the test coverage and the code to make sure it's actually, I mean, I for one haven't looked at it in years, so I forget if it was good enough at the time and we just have a bunch of junk and now it's been long enough that we're promoting it, or if it's actually, you know, high quality and has good test coverage and what, that sort of thing. So just doing kind of a manual audit of it would probably go a long way. It's probably fine. I don't know.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks. Let's move on. I guess I can present this since Zoran's not here. So this is another promotion about the Envoy stats command. For those who are not very familiar with it, like I wasn't until I tried to run the command earlier today. This basically queries the stats endpoint on Envoy for a given pod and can return it in various formats. So the pro of doing this is it's apparently very useful for debugging. I use it almost as much as proxy config, hasn't changed in a long time and works very well. I personally don't love it very much. Like it seems odd that a user usually don't query stats from one endpoint. You query it in your monitoring system, Grafana or whatever. And like it's very hard to consume the raw stats in any format. In the stats.d format, which is the default, it's virtually unreadable, and it's kind of a crazy format that also has tons of bugs. Like this format here is clearly not correct. In the Prometheus format, it's maybe a little better, but still like not intended for humans to really engage. It's more of a machine thing. And it exposes all the Envoy stats too, which we don't have kind of stable guarantees, so it's kind of weird. And yeah, thanks Ben for adding that. I was thinking the same and forgot to write it. Like we already have commands to do a curl request to the pod, so you can already kind of do this. It's just Istio request /stats or something along those lines. So I don't love the idea. But open to other opinions. Obviously, it doesn't hurt us that much to have it. Like it's, I'm sure, a small amount of code and whatnot. But.
I know we've talked in the enhancements subgroup about, trying to get to a place where we can up or out commands that are in experimental or features that are in experimental. I would hate to see this pushed out if there's someone getting value from it. At the same time, experimental feels like the right place if it's got an unstable interface.
I mean, if anybody's using this now, could they just replace it with one-liner curl, the one-liner Istio control, the one-liner curl, and get exactly the same output? Like, if they could, I don't think we would break anybody by doing that in a significant sense.
I think there is like a YAML format. I don't know that. But still, I don't know who wants a YAML format of metrics. Like it's kind of I don't know if you're reading that, then maybe you're a robot and not a person. I don't know.
Yeah, so I do remember somebody on our team, our extension team from Solo actually made a PR to enhance this. So I do think it's being used. I would be really, really cautious to drop it if it's already there. So just want to share that.
Like previous discussion, it's one thing to keep around the code for backward compatibility for people who use it. Another thing to promote it. I mean, if we keep it as a permanent experiment, I have no problem, but it isn't an API.
Keith?
What kind of visibility do we have into the curl functionality that's being referenced? Is there like a istio curl command? This may be obvious, but I'm not 100% sure what folks are referencing.
I mean, like if this is, well, it's like, you can hit any of the internal Envoy endpoints by like, doing a exec into the pod and doing a curl, right? Like there's a way to do, all those endpoints are just REST endpoints that are sitting there. So you can do a get on the endpoint and get the same result, right? There's a couple of examples we have scattered around for doing that with other endpoints like debug and such. Like if the Istio control tool is basically just doing that, then it seems unnecessary to keep it around in terms of like the code maintenance. If it's doing like a value add on top of that and not just like getting and dumping, then that's something else. But like that's kind of my personal metric for keeping it around is, does it actually add anything over just doing a get on the endpoint anyway? Like, because we could just document that with like a copy this and run it and dump the endpoint, and there you go.
I looked through it. It's basically not. I mean, it's a slightly nicer interface than CLI over the REST interface that Envoy exposes. But at the end of the day, it's just setting up the command and then dumping the command directly. Well, it also can convert JSON to YAML, but you can do that with any CLI tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm slightly in favor of having some way, having some way to do that outside of the kubectl exec approach. For usability reasons. I'm slightly persuaded by John's argument that not everything, in the chat specifically, that not everything needs to be in Istio CTL. Maybe this is an Istio ecosystem thing. I don't know. If the issue is code maintenance, then maybe we can look into something like that. But I will say that the ability to be able to use something besides the whole curl dance, I mean, that requires a certain level of knowledge around knowing how Envoy sidecars are set up, the admin stats, the stats interface, knowing what URL to hit. So I think that not all our users are going to be that savvy, but they still will benefit from these sorts of things. So all that to say, I'm in favor of having something like this that's simpler than just a curl command. But at the same time, I agree that we should be cautious about turning anything into an API that's not a stable interface. So, I mean, when maybe one thing we could do is like, well, Envoy changes admin interface. There's never any guarantees. Never mind about that. But yeah, just some thoughts there. I guess I'm both sides again a bit.
Yeah, I would say like if the user is not savvy to internal details, then this is not the command for them. Like no human should ever be looking at the raw metrics. Like that's something that a dashboard should expose. So to me, for other commands, I think it's a valid argument in general, but I don't know that it applies too much here.
If I can take a bit one step further, what you said, John, this is telemetry, effectively. The telemetry should go to dashboard, should be processed by tools, and not with port forward or exec. Another alternative, and probably the proper way to do this, is to expose the information through the already existing metrics endpoint we expose on 15020, and allow arbitrary tools like any telemetry, like Prometheus or other tools, to actually pull it as more or less stable interface. I probably not be a stable interface, but will be better than port forward and curl. And then it can be automated in other ways, and we can preserve it as a stable interface. I don't know how stable, but as an interface, part of the telemetry surface that we expose, because it is telemetry after all. And it will be independent of Istio cutter. It will be just, hey, you connect to this port with any tool, you can get some metrics if they're enabled.
Has anybody spoken with Jean-Ping to understand what his particular use case is for this command?
I haven't directly, but I imagine it's when he's working on developing things related to metrics or debugging things related to metrics. So,
okay,
just a guess.
At least his comment said it's very useful for debugging, which is what I heard also. So I definitely think we should not remove it because multiple people said it's useful.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, I don't mind keeping it, but I don't think it has to be promoted.
Promotion.
Ultimately,
yeah,
if we
maybe
did
not
remove it,
ready.
I can write up a bash alias for anyone that wants to get 80% of the functionality.
Yeah, but people have to
not hard.
download your bash if it's part of it.
Sure, but this is
install,
for
right?
this is a developer-facing tool, right? The people that find it useful are Istio developers, not Istio users. I'm
Actually,
guessing.
no. The user I heard it's not a developer on the Istio also. I mean, it's probably working with a lot of customer debugging issues. So I'm just saying it's outside of like a maintainer of Istio. I think other people have hands, so.
I can jump in, I guess. Is the stats info included in the bug report command? I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm almost positive it does. Go ahead, Ben. It sounds like we're getting to consensus that let's keep it around but not promote it, though. So
Yeah, I was going to just say, should we just document a curl option somewhere? Just to sort of show that like you can do this like without Istio control alongside, like, so you can do this Istio control or curl. Here's the curl. If it's actually a one-liner, that might help us kind of make the case for later not keeping it, right? If we can say, look, here's an equivalent one-liner, run this, you get the same result. Put that in the doc somewhere, and then in 6 months or whatever, we can circle back and say, look, people are using this. It's the same thing. We've sort of shown that it could be an equivalent drop-in. Like if it is actually that simple, right? If it's not that simple, then we could just we'll have proved it and keep it around, I suspect it would be though. So I'll put an action item in there. If we're okay with that, I can update the docs to I could try to go and update the docs to say like, look, here's the curl way to do it. And then just because alongside the other one, and then we can just at least prove that out and eventually drop it if we don't want to do it. Because again, it is up or out eventually. So
yeah, talk to Nick Nellis before you do that.
Yeah, I will. And if it turns out that we need it as a result of that, that'll be good info too. So, but yeah, eventually we got it up or out. So I would rather force the discussion and see which it ends up needing to be.
+1, these are great conversations to have, and I think we should have them more often. So, kudos to Z-Ram for bringing it up.
all right, let's move on to the next one. It's my doc. Let me share it. All right, I thought I shared this with the working group earlier, like a couple months ago, but then I found out it wasn't actually shared. So I don't know if I just presented it or if I just met with a couple individuals. Not sure. So this may or may not be new, but I've iterated on it. No pun intended on the name. So the idea here is issue we've had in the project, I think, is that we favored backwards compatibility a lot, which was directly in response to feedback of users that upgrades were hard and whatnot. And that's brought a lot of benefits, but it has also caused a lot of issues in that we can't improve things. So the most egregious example, I think, is we don't verify TLS certificates by default when we do egress TLS connections. That's terrible. I cannot understate how bad that is, right? But we haven't changed it because of backwards compatibility. So I've been thinking of some ways on how we can meet both of these personas. As a project, we want to be able to iterate and improve on the product. And we want to make it so that users don't have to set 50 flags in order to have a reasonable product, right? The default should be the best. But Istio users don't want to have to deal with breaking changes every release, and then they don't upgrade, and then they're on super old versions of CVEs, etc. Ideally, if you look at a project like Go or something, I've never once really thought to not upgrade Go. It's never, maybe a little bit, but it almost never breaks you, right? And so if you get to that state, it's very good because then you don't have to, there's less demand for maintaining so many versions. Go only supports the last 2 versions, yet it's used in almost every company. without much complaint, because it's cheap to upgrade, right? And you adopt the changes as you want, and it's kind of decoupled from the versioning. So that's kind of my North Star, is that we get to that point where anytime an upgrade's out, it's almost obvious you upgrade to it. And then there will later be maybe breaking changes or something, but you can adopt them kind of decoupled from the actual version. So I put some prior art here. Go is a great example. Rust has something similar called additions. You can look into it if you want, but you probably don't have enough time to go into all the details. So I'm proposing, and obviously we can change names if we want, a new concept that I call compatibility versions, which basically encodes a set of defaults that were for a given version. So the idea of this is, I think it's best to actually show an example. So today, this is kind of what we do for a new change. And usually it's not just over 3 releases, but over like 10 releases because we forget about it. So generally, we'll introduce a new feature. It'll be off by default. Sometimes it's on by default if we're more confident, but often it's off. The next version will make it on by default, and then a future version will remove the flag entirely, right? So at some point, in this case on 1.1, all the users consume this breaking change when they upgrade, right? They have to explicitly opt out, usually once they, either if they read it in the release notes or after they upgrade and it breaks them. So the idea behind compatibility versions is that they can say that they want all the defaults from a specific version. So when they upgrade to 1.1, instead of, let's see if I can make this pageless. Well, okay, yeah, there we go. Instead of having all the new flags, and I'm just showing one example here, right? There could be 5, 10, 15 concurrent flags going on, which makes it much more complicated than this example shows. If they don't want to consume all the new breaking changes of 1.1, they can just set a flag that said, look, I know I'm upgrading from version 1.0. I set Helm set compatibility version 1.0, and I get all the old behavior of 1.0, but with the new version of 1.1, which comes with performance fixes, bug fixes, security fixes, any kind of backwards compatible improvements. And then all the not backwards compatible improvements are kind of gated behind these flags. So as they keep upgrading, they can continue to say, look, I want version 1.0 still, I want version 1.0 still. And eventually we'll remove the version. I'm proposing here that we keep three previous versions of compatibility versions, but we can debate whether we do more or less or something else. I'm also proposing that we have a preview mode that's like, what it sounds like. You say, I don't want the future changes, so that if you're kind of ahead of the curve or running in a development cluster or whatever, you can try out the changes ahead of time, but we don't need to do that if people aren't a fan of that. That's the high level. I obviously have a bit more detail in here about a bunch of different things, so I can go in more depth, but I want to pause if there's some questions or anything. Costin, what is the version of Istio? Yeah, it's the version of the binaries, the Helm chart, the CRDs.
But which one? Because there are too many things combined in Istio, because Istio implements a set of API, set of CRDs. I mean, it implements gateway API with some CRDs. It implements ambient, which is some set of APIs. It implements 20 different experimental features you may want or may not want in production. The idea is good. I mean, I don't think we used to call it, Istio stable. We used to call it many other things. We call it profile before, so it's a great idea. It's just the details that are a bit tricky.
Yeah, so on the versioning thing, yeah, like we do have other dependencies, and like Kubernetes, for example, like we don't ship those though. So we have a compatibility range of the Istio version, which we do ship and is versioned, and what versions of other things it supports, which I think is somewhat orthogonal to this. So the compatibility version here is referring to the Istio, the things that Istio ships itself, which are all versioned. Saying this is profiles, I agree, it is profiles actually. Later in the doc, I say that basically like this will either be exactly the same implementation as profiles, but not literally -- profile this, or we could make it a profile. We could say profile is 1.0 compat or whatever. Either one's fine.
John, my point is not necessarily about the version itself. It's about the fact that the focus is not necessarily version Istio 1.15.1 or 1.4, which is a Istio D implementation details. It's about the intent of the user to have a particular default behavior, which is effectively a profile, which is decoupled from the version. You can have Istio 1.20 with a stable profile, with an ambient profile, with a gateway-only profile, and you specify the intent is to use this specific set of APIs and features and what experimental on or off. So a set of kind of broader things which are completely decoupled even from version. You can have same version of Istio, very different behaviors, defaults, and everything else.
Yeah, so I think the issue, like, if say we talked about like safe Istio, right? The issue with safe Istio or ambient or anything is that those are one-time things, kind of. Like if we just say a profile is stable, then sure, we can go put all the existing behavior into stable and then go change whatever we want in the unstable version. But now we can't change stable, right? Because we set it stable, so we can never iterate on it. So that's what this is trying to solve. I see your stable 1.0 comment. Stable, extra stable. That's basically what this is. It's just different names, right? And I'm fine with changing names actually. In the original doc, I didn't use versions. I think I forget what I decided. Years, or maybe it was even opaque names like Ubuntu does, like the animal names or whatever. So we can change compatibility version as a name. We can make it profiles. We can not even use version or something. I think version's a bit more straightforward because you know what version you're on. You know what version you're going to, so you can just say, I want the compatibility version for I'm on. But I'm open to alternatives. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
A couple things. One, I guess, like, I think Whitney brought this up in the doc a little bit, but like, it feels weird or potentially a big burden to have to support many previous compatibility versions, right? Like either it's current and one back, or current and experimental / preview, at which point it's a lot like the profiles, right? But like I don't, it's going to be a big burden to maintain compatibility for 2 versions back. It feels like, to the point where I don't know if that's really valuable in a world with revisions, right? Because if we have functional revisions so that you can install 2 Istios side by side and choose which workload goes to which one, then the argument for the backwards compatibility for N-2 or whatever feels less necessary. That's kind of the thing that jumps to mind there, is like, if we have revision, if we have revisions, we don't really need this, right? Because this is designed under the assumption that you have one global Istio at a time, and you replace it with something that needs to advertise backwards compatibility versus having multiples installed that you can move workloads between.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 parts there. There's, do we need it with revisions, and is it maintainable? So I'll cover the maintainable one first. So if we compare these 2 states, top and bottom, in this one we maintain the flag for 3 versions, and in this one we maintain it for 4 versions, right? Or sorry, 2 versions versus 4 versions. So 2 extra versions, 6 more months. It is more, obviously, but at the same time, this top scenario, I don't think has ever really happened, right? We generally do this part off by default for like 8 releases, and then we realize that it's been off by default and turn it on. Or we do the opposite and we turn it on, but we keep the flag forever for years in some cases before we remember and go clean it up. In fact, like, while we could do this option, I don't know that there's actually been many flags that have been that aggressive. And we've gotten complaints from users in the past when we have been somewhat aggressive about the removal state not being later. So I think in practice, we're already doing most of that, most of that maintenance. Now, there could be some future changes that is super hard to maintain. Maybe, which we could always say, like, worst case, we can say, like, look, this one is special. We're not going to maintain it for the full 3 releases or whatever. We have that flexibility, I think, but I'm not so sure that it will really come to it. The other one was revisions. We have a bunch of hands, so I'll probably answer that after those. Do you want to go ahead, Keith?
Yeah, sure. I think this may be where you're going with revisions and stuff as well. So let me know if I'm stepping on you. But I think to Ben's question, in my mind, I think the motivation for this kind of change is that versioning in Istio today, and it's not exclusive to Istio, but versioning Istio today is too coupled for what users are wanting to do, versioning right now, a new version of Istio or a new revision of Istio, a new Istio D control plane, not only has new behavior, which is what this proposal handles with defaults, not only has new behavior, but you have to make decisions about. Those are somewhat negotiable. You can change what behavior you want to consume, but it also has security patches. It also has bug fixes. It also has performance improvements potentially, and those are things that are going to be like non-negotiable for your organization, for your team, and you need to consume those. In the security case, especially with Istio's, 6 months plus like 2 weeks of support for each version, like you need to consume those security patches. And so right, so to upgrade to take them, that requires, in large enterprises, it requires planning, it requires sign off, it requires some ungodly long processes in some cases in order to get that new version approved. But not on once you get through with that, you don't only have to think about in order to do that, you don't have to just think about the security changes, the transparent changes that you need to consume for security reasons. You also have to deal with the behavior changes that might bite you. And the appeal of this proposal to me, and kind of what I was aiming for with Safe Istio to some extent, is the ability to not have to care as much about the behavior, or at least have a longer period of time where you can keep your same behavior, keep your stability, and plan for those changing defaults later, and codifying that in such a way where it is at least manageable. You don't have to release notes for every single release in 3 months or 6 months. It's too much. The feedback I'm getting from a lot of our customers that's just too fast and too much to do in a 3-month time span. So that's where this is really compelling to me.
A lot of this feels, the thing is though, like you do want people to move eventually, right? Like if we make it easy for you to stay on an old version because you are stuck on an old version, that's fine. But to what degree do we subsidize it when you say, I want 118, but with bug fixes from 120, but 118 is not getting backports because it's done, but I'm still on it. Like this is trying to add flexibility to enable that, but like all that really does is kind of complicate the release matrix in a really concerning way. At least that's what I feel personally. Like this just creates a lot of complexity in terms of, okay, I got this version, but is this compatibility? But side by side, maybe, I don't know. And like, just if you want the old version, install the old version. We will never make you upgrade. If you want something new, then you can either install the new Istio version side by side and selectively move your workloads over to it as you want, or you can try to get something backported to a supported version. But like at some point, we just have to say, no, we're not doing that. Like, I don't see the difference between saying 120 supports N-2 compatibility versus saying Istio supports N-2 releases, right? They are functionally the same thing. One is just more complicated.
So we already, yeah, go ahead, Kasim.
No, just to quickly answer, a lot of confusion is the fact that you put versions in the document. I mean, it's not about Istio 119 versus 120 or the fundamental thing is that a set of default behaviors, which we have in Istio, decouples the Istio D version from the API and behavior version. That's what this document is doing. You have a set of behaviors, what should happen. It's just covered by how it works, how we treat cluster local, how we treat TLS verification. You can stay with 120. I mean, you have exactly the latest version of Istio, but you still need to be able to express the version of behaviors that you want. I mean, how defaults operate. And that, let's forget completely about upgrade of Istio. You just have Istio today, and you want to change to ambient or to a set of behavior and defaults that are better and are proven to be, to fix known bugs.
Yeah,
That's all this proposal is about.
Right, so essentially compatibility profile, let's say, just for the sake of argument, something like that. That I understand. The only concern I have there is making sure that we constrain the number of profiles such that it does not evolve into versions 120, 121, 122. You know, we have 10 of them. Like, that's kind of where I think Whitney's point about maybe we need at most 2 or something like that becomes more important. We don't name them after versions. It's, you know, previous and current, or current experimental, or stable, or production, or something like that. Like, I think you're right. The version thing is throwing off a little bit, but also I think the potential for exploding the number of profiles or versions that we would support here is the thing that has to be controlled for, basically.
I don't think it's, I mean, if we have, what we name it is irrelevant, right? This could be named Bob and Jim.
Right. How
and
many we have
Pat,
is the problem.
but-
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could, I proposed 3. It sounds like there's been a lot of mentions that we should have 2 instead, which we could switch to 2. I don't think that's a fundamental difference. I will show a chart showing something in a bit that will maybe sway towards 3. But one thing I will say on your thing about versions and the matrix and stuff, I actually agree. Like, it's basically you have n squared behaviors, because on each version you maintain 3 versions and you maintain 3 versions. This process actually works way better if you don't use multiple releases that are supported and you do a rolling release model. But I have 0 ability to make that happen in this project. But if you want to read more, I have a blog about it where I say that's basically the way projects should work. But if I said that, Red Hat would probably kill me. But at the same time, we're already doing this anyways. Like, I don't think this is actually going to change what we're maintaining. It's just really a surface level helpers to make it easier for users to upgrade and to enable us to change the defaults. On the 3 versions, I had a flow here of why I said 3 versions. And the relationship was in the fact that we allow skip version upgrades. So if we only allow 2 versions, then you're basically saying, like, you have to, you do the skip level upgrade, then you have to migrate immediately. By doing 3, it allows you an even longer time to migrate from the versions. So here's like kind of a proposed flow. If you're a very slow adopter, like you start on 1 version, you do a skip version upgrade after 6 months, and you say, I want the 1.0 compatibility. And then finally, in 12 to 18 months, you upgrade to 1.4 and pick up the other changes. So actually, now that I think about this, I think that would work with 3 versions as well. So maybe 2 would be fine.
John, I strongly suggest we remove all mention of version from the document, especially Istio version. Its profiles should not be version 1, 2, 3. It should be experimental, V1, and legacy. Legacy is what we have today. V1 is, whatever we the next discussion we are having about the proposal, and experimental includes, but it should not be tied to an upgrade. It should be tied to a set of APIs and features. Not otherwise it will be a nightmare. I completely agree with Ben.
So I don't mind if we make it so that stable means like n-2 or whatever, or we call it n-2 and we don't call it a version. But we should be clear that stable doesn't mean stable in one version doesn't mean stable in the next. It means 2 months old.
Stable 1.0 is a profile we are going to release first. Legacy remains whatever legacy is the behavior we had since 0.1 with backward compatibility and so forth. So legacy is clear. It's not going to be version because it's exactly what we have today. And then stable will be stable 1, stable 2 with very small upgrade, because hopefully will never change. It will be only V1 APIs and very stable things. And experimental will move very fast. I mean, it can change as fast as we want.
That sounds like the same thing, but actually that there's no deprecation ever and we maintain the old behavior forever.
Legacy, we have to maintain it for as long as we have people on it. I mean, there is nothing we can do about legacy. I mean, it's what are you going to do?
I mean, you don't have to. You can say, look, you have 18 months to migrate. That's a long time to migrate, right?
Well, we tried this. I mean, 1.4, how long did it last? And it was just a small change in behavior.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think that was mostly because we were responsible for upgrading people and we didn't do it.
But let's forget about legacy. Legacy, we can discuss how we can kill it. If we can kill it, wonderful. But let's leave legacy aside. Stable and experimental, that's, we have a discussion about this one bullet point down the road. So
yeah. So I guess like there's two discussions. Like, do we want to do this? And then what is it? Is it years? Is it names? Is it versions? I absolutely expect us to bite to that. is there, absent of that, do we have, what do people think? Like, should we do this?
Yes.
Yes, if we can constrain the number of tags or versions or things people have to worry about. But yes, conceptually, the broad idea is fine.
Can we have more time to think?
Yeah, certainly.
How does this affect CRDs? A lot of it, a lot of this stuff has been on pilot behavior, but and this is kind of getting to, I think, one of the topics Whitney had on the agenda. But I'm interested to see, like, what does this mean for CRDs and compatibility and defaults?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of it, maybe I don't understand, or I probably don't fully grok what you're saying, but like one of the changes is like verify cert at client, which impacts how destination rule works. But I'm guessing you mean more like schema level things, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good clarification. It's like schema. This feels distinct from, almost like it has to be distinct from schema level defaults inside the CRD itself.
Well, schema defaults could easily be controlled by this because we don't actually even use Kubernetes defaulting mechanisms. We just say if it's unset, behavior is XYZ. If we were talking about like adding new experimental fields and whatnot, I don't know exactly because we haven't even really fully grokked out what that looks like, but I'm guessing that would probably be orthogonal. Unless it's like we disable the fields and then you have to be above a certain compatibility version to enable them or something, or like they stay disabled if you're on an older compatibility version, something along those lines, but probably needs some more thought.
Yeah, my concern was specifically the scenario where you change the default, well, because we only have one version in CRDs essentially, and so
Yeah.
for CRD defaults, you need to not do that anymore. Or we'd have to encode all the defaults inside pilot itself rather than the CRD.
But that's how they are, really. There's no defaults in. We never use the Kubernetes defaulting mechanism. Oh, it may be in the comments in the documentation, but that's, that can be changed to say it's this default on.
No, we cannot change comments. I mean, once it's V1, whatever is in the comment is contract. Yeah, I agree.
Maybe. I mean,
Things like
verify cert at client, like we said, it won't verify. It's in the doc. That doesn't mean we can't change the behavior with the compatibility version, right? Now,
Unless we have a very high
is
bar.
it good behavior? No, it's not good behavior. But like an example in the past that we actually did, actually that's a good one here. We changed round robin to least request, right? We did that. We changed the default value in a patch release. That would have been an obvious example of a time when we should have used this if we had it. And these are, if I never really mentioned this, but I scrolled down here, these are kind of what I would say would be some of the top contenders that were top of mind to do in the kind of first iteration. Probably not all of them, but probably at least these two.
We are supposed to learn from mistakes. We're supposed to learn from mistakes, not to repeat them.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like we did this, it was bad.
I know.
It would have been a much better if we had done it with this change. Maybe we shouldn't have done it at all, but if we did, it would be enabled better through this mechanism.
And that's why I strongly support this proposal, but not necessarily the version.
When we talk about, both dealing with defaults in CRDs as well as default behavior of Istio and other things, the thing that worries me is the idea of this logic getting sort of peppered throughout the code base. As long as we can store these default sets in a central location where you can look at two default sets and like compare them side by side, rather than just having branch logic kind of distributed in thousands of different files, I think that would be great.
Yeah, like one thing to be clear, at least in how I'm proposing it here, is this is very much surface level installation modification. Like all of these flags and stuff, they already exist. Like I could go in my repo today and bust out some compatibility version profiles for all the different versions and make like a not official compatibility versions for Istio. I don't think it achieves the same benefits, but like it's not like this is fundamental changes. It's very much surface level. But I think even the surface level change enables something really important, which is that we feel comfortable iterating on the defaults.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, we are out of time, so sorry to anyone that had agenda below me. I guess we will put that on future agenda and see you all in the ambient meeting.